Hello, welcome to another session with me, Aruna Dantabhaktuni. In today's session, we will learn about functions. Functions are useful when you want to perform a set of operation more than once. For example, in this case, we will again look at performing an operation in the dataset, which is the Indomath dataset. So what we are doing here is calling that dataset and picking subject ID 1 and print ID 1 and then also give us a summary of the data from subject ID 1. All right. So once we execute, let's see what comes out. So this is for subject ID 1. Often you might want to be doing this for multiple subjects. You could choose to repeat the code, change the numbers, too much work. Instead of that, you can actually write a function. And let's see how do we do that. In order to define a function, you will have to have three primary things. One is you want to wrap this command into these curly brackets. The second is to add a function keyword. And then you want to give that function a name. So we are going to be calling that patient summary because that's what we are doing here. So if we execute this, you will see patient summary, and that will give you the printout of what we have done. So what if you want to get the patient summary for subject ID 2 and multiple other subjects? So if we go back to the function that we wrote, there were a few things that we have hard-coded, which we will have to change. For instance, we have hard-coded the subject to be subject ID to be 1, and we have also hard-coded the function would print number 1. Because we want to make this applicable to other subjects, we will have to introduce an ID term into that function. And we'll have to change all of that accordingly in the function that we have written as well. So in here, in this function, introduce ID there. And this ID is an argument of, to that function. So let's define this function now. And now we can execute the function. However, you can see that we got into an error because now the argument requires us to provide the ID that we would like to look at. So when we execute and define the ID of the subject, we see the summary. We can do the same for patient ID 2 or 3. Okay, so that is a little bit more about the functions. If you would like to execute this function multiple times, you can also do that by introducing the for loop. As you would recall from our previous tutorials, here if you introduce a for loop, it'll just make this process a lot more easier, and you would be able to run it for multiple subject IDs. And in this case, we have run it for subject IDs 1 through 4. All right. Now let's look at the return command. In this case, we were actually printing the output of our function, but often we might have to store the information from execution of the function into a variable, and that's when you use return. The way this would work is once you have run that command, you will be assigning a variable where your return or the values are going to be stored. So now the output of the function that we ran is in my value. So we can just visualize what is there in my value here. the main thing I want you to remember is that now that the output is in my value, you can actually use that to do further analysis. And that is the objective of using return. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our future tutorials. Take care.